So, welcome back, everyone. We have Armunn here with us, and we're going to be speaking on, I guess, the economic animal and this analogy of the marathon as, I guess, as an analogy, a metaphor for the economic system and how they have turned us all into the Homo economicus. This economized animal, this consumeristic-driven man. How are you doing, Armunn?
All good here. I hope you too, man.
Yes, absolutely. I'm doing well. So before we get into the opening question, I'll just
Mm.
open it up with a little introduction. So I wrote this: to understand the cage, we have to understand how the prisoner is defined. We live in a world dominated by economic theory and economics. Whether we look at the capitalist West or the communist experiments of the past, we see a shared fatal flaw. They both view man as a Homo economicus, the economic man. They define us as a biological machine, creatures of inputs and outputs driven solely by consumption and production. I wrote on this, which I termed it the theory of ontological economics, where I described this as an attempt to turn man into a puppet of wood, a predictable, finite object, rather than acknowledging him as a being of a textured, tangled infinite. So we see in Mary Shelley's Frankenstein novel, also, funnily enough, termed, I think it was first titled The Modern Prometheus, where esoterically we are not necessarily the doctor in that story. We are the creature itself. We are the beings stitched together from dead parts, dead ideologies, dead history, dead currencies, synthetic parts. By a modern Prometheus, the system that seeks to play God. The system wants to create life without spirit, to animate a body without a soul. It builds a monster that is stronger, faster, and more efficient than a man, but it leaves him in a state of profound spiritual starvation, wandering a frozen wasteland asking, what am I and who am I? So, Armunn, the systems of power seem obsessed with maintaining this aforesaid Frankensteinian project. They need us to be the monster, the Homo economicus, stitched together by utility and devoid of the divine spark. In your opinion, why is the system so terrified of us realizing we're not the monster of this story? And moreover, as well, in the novel um, Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, the creature turns on his creator in the end because effectively he's denied love and meaning. Of course, the creature is a sort of shadow being. So, is the marathon as well that we are running? Is it simply an attempt by the elites to keep their creature busy, so we don't understand the system of the masters, to thus unravel the stitchings? What's your opinions upon that?
Well, it is both a continuation or a maintenance of the system itself, sure, but it's also at the same time, because it depends on the POV, right? It depends on the point of view of who is observing. It is also an opportunity to rediscover the life beyond that Frankenstein monster. One thing that I would say first and foremost is that um, I think that man, and this is what I observe, mankind as an organic being, what animates it, let's say, what when I say animates it is in terms of actual life, is love, not this, love as a feeling or whatever, but love as an energy, let's say, so the love for life itself. Love and life could perhaps be synonymous in this case. You understand? In the sense that it is an energy of um, action through a directed will that has only life, only the standards of life, let's say, in the organic sense, as the goal. So it has no economics involved in it. You understand? And the economics is exactly, therefore, a replacement of love.
Hmm.
And when you look at it closely, um, you understand that things that you would see in an organic community sense, because of course man is supposed to live gregariously, that would not involve any quantification in the sense, oh, you gave me, one more potato than I gave you, this kind of thing. Um, because the important thing is that you are well, I am well, we both contribute, etc., etc., etc. It becomes a quantifiable thing. So it replaces this idea of, um, how can I put it, doing it by love. You understand? Like,
Yeah.
you can do something, even if it's tilling the earth, or if it's building a house, or if it's painting a painting, whatever it is that you do, you do it because you love it, right? In the same way that you love your family, that you love your, the people that are closer to you, etc., etc. But this then becomes a replacement, or is replaced by this economic mentality, which quantifies. So it tries to um, uh, um, put not only a price tag per se, because money is a subset of it, but a a valuation. Right, what you did is worth more than what I did, for example, this kind of thing, right?
Hmm.
And when you put it that way, of course, you remove love, and therefore you remove life. Right? So it is not that I would just correct that vision about Frankenstein. It's not that we were made from dead body parts. Is that our bodies, our organic bodies, in metaphorical sense, were drained of love and therefore drained of life, and injected with a false animation that, in your metaphor, would be the economic mentality, right? So you stop interacting with the world through that, directed will individual that is inserted in a collective setting, a familial collective setting, and it becomes therefore a quantification. How much are you worth, right? How much are your skills worth, right? If Okay, we don't need any more I don't know, bakers, right? So your skills are devalued all of a sudden, right? Um, and that is exactly the mentality that attributes. So it removes the vocation, the organic vocation, from man and from each individual, and puts them framed into a what's it called, demand and
Demand,
the
demand and supply, supply and demand.
demand and supply, supply and demand, exactly, right? So your skills are only as worth as much as they are in demand, and you can supply them. If there's no demand for your skills, then you are devalued, right? So that is basically the how things are framed. And of course, if you can direct what is the demand, you can drain further and further natural vocations that you perhaps don't want to be seen, or don't want to manifest. Now, this is the maintenance part, but it's also an opportunity, because every time that the reflected shadow applies pressure on the projected shadow, it creates an opportunity. Sure, the shadow grows, but there's an opportunity there for the mind character to see, hang on, something's wrong, because I'm getting a feedback from life, from what I consider life, or the world, or etc., that is seems to go against that conviction, right? That idea um, that I project out, my beliefs, my filters the way I see life, etc., etc. So it is also an opportunity. Of course, I'm not saying that everyone will take that opportunity, but it is there, an opportunity for the individual to stop running the marathon, like we've spoken previously. And of course, you can go into the marathon metaphor to explain that, but you can stop running. It's an opportunity to stop running the metaphor, sit down, have a smoke, let's say, and look and see, wait a second, is this really who I am running this marathon, right? Is this really my organic self? And if that contemplation is done, that is why the system always tries to minimize as much as possible the rest periods. And when I say rest, is not just physical rest, but to minimize the empty time where you can, with your mind empty, you can start contemplating on these things, right? Because these things emerge; they're always there, trying to breach through and contact the mind character. The ego is continuously trying to breach through. So that is also an opportunity. And this is what I think the individual should, as a beginning process, focus on. But I don't know if I answered your original question.
No, actually, you answered about 5 of them. So if I repeat a question again, um, yeah, you'll have to excuse me. But yeah, you answered about 5 because I was looking through the list of questions. Questions I haven't even asked yet. But yeah, that's
That's good. I anticipate.
yeah. It's telepathy. It's because you've
Yeah.
stopped running the marathon. You've developed it.
Um,
But
yeah.
well, that touches upon several things, and you even see in Frankenstein's the original story and in the movie, there's several key points where he's people are encouraging him to desist from effectively this sort of Promethean pathway to self destruction, and attempting to be like the divine, attempting to um, establish God effectively, or establish himself as God. Pardon. You see the same thing, funnily enough, with the financial system. They have this sort of Kabbalistic premise that, for example, the credit and the debt are the same thing. The plus one, minus one are effectively the same entwined paradox. Thus, this echoes the Kabbalistic concept of the nothingness or the Ein, which in the Kabbalistic system, and if you look further into Judaism and all of Abrahamism, really, that is effectively what they see as God. It's at the core of their religion. Perhaps not the revealed counterparts, but the unrevealed essence of it, at least. And so the idea that they're stitching body parts together, that sort of metaphor that all of these things are control mechanisms, right? They're synthetic identities, effectively. There's if you think of us as the moths or the flies, that would be the artificial lamp that simulates the blinding light and the enticing light to the insect of the sun. Thus, it draws us in. But here's another thing I was pondering on as well. We're talking about these dead parts, right? These hollow parts that maintain the control structure, this sort of economic model. Um, you find, let's take for example nationalism. It at its core really is it's a surrogate family. However,
Mhm.
with nationalism, what you require is all of these preservatives, because it is a dead thing, right? Dead things require preservatives, living things do not. So you require the preservatives of, banners, anthems, heroic stories and ideals, and this sort of great and gloried past, even if it may be romanticized or mythologized, thus inevitably fictional. And you require the pomposity of ritual and all of this. However, with the organic thing that it's attempting to mimic, that of the family, what father has to maintain the unity of his household vis-a-vis, I don't know, getting all of his children and his wife to march in unison to a familial anthem, or to have familial banners or whatever it may be, right? Or some sort of ritual and pomp. You don't have that because it is organic. It's something that grows out of, as you're saying, love. It's not something that grows out of the necessity to consolidate a tax jurisdiction under the guise of a nation, um, which is that synthetic idea. So
Mhm.
here's a question. Actually, I have two ways I can go with this question. I think I'll go with this one first, right? So um, I wrote in my theory of ontological economics that there's an obsession, of course, with any economic model, really. Of course, it's most pronounced in our modern sort of technocratic, techno-capitalist system, however we want to describe it, of this infinite growth principle. So the infinite growth principle is almost like a ghost haunting its own grave, to postpone its own psycho-spiritual post-mortem, as I stated. So is the global economy essentially a denial of death? Which of course we see somewhat in Frankenstein. Again, it's more pronounced in the modern film adaptation that's just came out this year. So are we hoarding wealth because we are terrified of what happens, when the game stops? What are your opinions upon that?
Yes, although that won't be actual death. It is perceived as death. It's that death that I say the mind character fears, because it's the death of a worldview where it lay its foundations, right? So the mind character started following a surrogate ego, a projected shadow, a partial rejection that contains a partial rejection of its actual ego. So it's basically an image, an imagined image that is partial. And that shadow requires a specific universe to exist. When I say universe, is a perception based, the way to see the world, right? And anything that threatens that universe, anything that threatens that perception, is of course perceived as an existential threat to what the mind character sees as its own individuality, which is this surrogate ego, this false ego, the shadow that it projected by that initial rejection. So it is actually, as you say, trying to evade death, but it's not the actual biological death.
Yes.
It is this psychological change of a world of perception, right? That it's trying to evade altogether, right?
So is
Uh,
death in that sense for the mind character, or this sort of a congealed shadow, is death in that sense, in its metaphorical sense, not the biological sense, is it the end of control? Is it
yes,
yeah,
it is. Yes, it is the great That's why the tower moment. Remember when we talked about the tower moment? The tower
yeah.
moment is the greatest opportunity of all. Of course, it's extremely uncomfortable, and no, it is not necessary. But it may come about if enough, um, if you've rejected enough to confront the things that you needed to confront. So it may build up to such an extent that it explodes in a tower moment. But what the tower moment is not actual biological death per se. I mean, hopefully it doesn't come to that, of course, but people sometimes do stupid things in under pressure. But it is an explosion of psychological pressure that destroys the worldview for that individual. And then one of two things can happen. One is that person, that psyche is shattered. It can't reconnect to the ego, and therefore lost its surrogate ego as well, the projected shadow, and so it's a shattered psyche. Or the mind character is brave enough to maintain some composure, let's say, and pursue back, so reconnect back to its organic ego. And then everything changes. That is, in even the other day, of course, just about that specific process, I was talking with I forget his name now on your Discord.
Truth is not fiction.
No, the guy from Kenya. Um,
Oh yeah, yeah.
I forget
His name as well.
his username. Anyway, and we were, or it was with MME, and I was presenting that the change can be completely immediate, as is seen, for example, in the Christmas Carol, right, where Scrooge is confronted. Of course, that is under the framing of Christmas and the Christmas spirit and the Christian, etc. This, but what you actually see there when you remove all the details is someone confronting the ghost of the past, the ghost of the present, and the ghost of a possible future. What that is basically a reevaluation of where that worldview came from, what is the effect that that worldview is having, and what will inevitably come if you continue with that worldview, right? And in that particular case, of course, it's a story, it's a fairy tale, it's to convey a message behind all that. But what is seen is that Scrooge was brave enough to confront the what he saw in the three ghosts. So how the worldview came about, what is its effect now, and what will inevitably lead in the future, and flipped, completely let it go. Was able to completely let it go, right? And then, as he says in the morning, I've never felt this light, right? I've never felt it's like a weight that came off, right? Because he stopped following the projected shadow that came from the original traumas he had due to his childhood, etc. So these things are always an opportunity, and by trying to um, make everything predictable, you try to evade that moment of quote unquote death, but at the same time you bring about opportunities, because as the pressure builds up, you inevitably at an individual level are going to get more and more opportunities for reevaluation, because things keep getting thrown back at you, as a feedback from the world. And I mean, you can continue pretending nothing's going on, but I think that it increases the chance, the possibility of you also start
Mhm.
looking at them.
With the Frankenstein story, you see that he travels to the far north, which is, it could be many metaphorical things, even as a astrotheological lens. But with Frankenstein, his um, inability and his, stubborn um, lack of desire to individuate that shadow, which is of course his monster. He travels to the far north, which is this notion that he lays within stagnancy, essentially, right? He's within a secluded, isolated um, mental environment. And of course, I mean, we could even see this within, for example, the UK at present. There's this sort of managerialist security state that's forming. You see it throughout all of the Five Eyes countries, most Western countries as well. You even see it, of course, in places like CCP-run China or even Russia, where they've become so paranoid of their citizenry. And you even see the UK talking about, everyone is to be considered a potential spy, even if they're functioning under double ignorance, which is effectively that they're dupes for another security state's interests. Even if they're not actively spies, right, directly on the payroll of another state, they may be, spies by proxy, by their own ignorance. So, and it even talks about hostile activity. But ultimately, when you boil all of this down, it's the same concept. the UK, and you even see this with the whole the zeitgeist of the UK. You know, this empire that ran a quarter of the globe. We've all in Britain. We all grow up with that sort of that legacy, and of course, we're living on the fumes of that legacy. And so, you see, with the UK, we're desperately attempting to sort of assert ourselves as we're still a great power. Of
Just
course,
sorry, just hold that
sure,
thought. Let me
yeah.
just make a quick parenthesis here before I forget.
Mhm.
But I thought the UK was a nation, right? Not an expansive thing, not a globalizing mechanism. Go ahead. Sorry.
It is a nation, but there's still this. See, there's this weird sense amongst the conservatives in the UK that they want to be a global power. They want to be a global player, if you will, right? They want to be seen as having power, but at the same point, they want to have they want to close off the borders of Britain and have be
But
insular to
Silas, I was being, it was a joke in a sense. I was being sarcastic because what I was saying is that the nation uses the same mechanisms as
Oh
globalization.
yes,
And
yes,
so,
absolutely,
and
yes.
so the nation expands and goes
Hmm.
on to other races and onto other countries. And it's fine as long as that particular race that you see as yours is in control. So it's the same as globalization, but at a smaller scale. I just wanted to make
Absolutely.
that parenthesis. Sorry about that.
No, I know absolutely. Well, absolutely. That's how I see the conservatives, and I guess you could call it the moral impotence of the sort of any conservative movement. I mean, of course, I'm in Britain right now, but you can look throughout any sort of conservative movement, contemporary, historical. It works in the same manner. Um, but you notice this, that there's a mind character that the UK state has, and it's
Hmm?
desperately, through paranoia, through every single negative trait, it's desperately, even at the cost of its own legitimacy, domestically, internationally, um, it's attempting to protect that, in the most hostile and, flailing manner. So you see a similar concept there. Almost the UK is like Victor Frankenstein. But what happens if you continually oppose that shadow character? Will it in like what we see in Frankenstein's
Hmm.
Mary Shelley's Frankenstein? Will it kill Victor in the end?
Of course. Yes, because the one thing that killed Victor, that provoked Victor to be killed by the monster, was that he was up until the very end a victim. Right? He never saw that it was his responsibility, his rejection, his actions that brought the monster to life, to animation, let's say, right? He created the monster and he was a victim. Oh, this monster is evil, he is evil, he is evil, he is evil. But he never saw the evil in himself, right? He never saw that, wait a second, I'm responsible for this monster, right? And the monster gave him several chances. The monster tried to be accepted, tried to fit in, tried to even, okay, you give me a companion and I disappear, you will never see me again. I will live outside in the woods, in the mountains. I will live complete. You will never see me again, right? But there was never an act of love from Victor. You understand? And what we must understand is that these mind characters, they feel abandoned, they feel outside of
Mhm.
love. You remember in the you several times you mentioned Faustus, right? And um, you remember in the conversation between Faustus and Mephistopheles, where Faustus is asking, "Oh, so is heaven real, or something like that,
Yes.
or are
Mm.
you condemned to hell? But you're outside of hell. You're here." And Mephistopheles says, well, do you think that I, who have seen the face of God and tasted of eternal bliss, am I not condemned to 1,000 hells just by being deprived? You see? So it's easy to say that, that's why I don't accept the term demon per se. I don't think it's external, but to each his own. But when people say, "Oh, evil, external, demons, archons, and this and that, and the demiurge, and etc." No, man, these are rejections. These are things that were excluded from its healthy place, right? And they were excluded by the mechanism that I spoke about sometimes in the past of pride and shame, right? They shamed you for in relation to a self-image, an imaginary self-image that you created that had pride that was hurt, right? And it was the same with Victor Frankenstein. It was the same with the story, in, for example, the Paradise Lost, John Milton, etc. But of course, stems from the Genesis story and so on. So all of this is because there is a self-image, a created self-image that rejects parts of itself and excludes them from the natural position, the healthy natural position that they would hold, right? Because if they are in their healthy natural position, they're not evil. And this is not to say that there isn't violence, but violence has a healthy place, you know? Even deceit has a healthy place. If you're running away from, I don't know, an animal or whatever, and you hide in the bush and the animal doesn't see you, you're deceiving the animal, right? Or if you're camouflaging, right, for some reason. So these things all have a healthy context to manifest. But as soon as they're rejected, that is what actually means to taste from the tree of good and evil, right? It is that you stop seeing things as a whole and you separate one thing from the other, therefore making them extremes. You understand? So the one side will have all the bad traits, quote unquote, and the other side will have all the good traits, and it's no longer a whole being. It's no longer an organic whole being. You understand what I'm trying to say?
Hmm.
So you create the first binary there. You remember when we talk about the binaries in the worldview, right? Because every worldview requires an opponent. Why does it require an opponent? Because it stems from the first binary, good versus evil. If we are good, those guys are evil. And of course, on their side, they will see vice versa, right? Oh, we are good and they are evil. Yeah. Of course, it all depends on the point of view because it's pride and shame. And it's all made up in that sense, right? But so
Hmm.
Victor was a victim up until the end, and that's what killed him, you know. And that is why I try to convey that at an individual sense, you can only take care of your own backyard. We can see all around us, yes, our neighbors and the people, etc. Following stupid things and going down a road that we know where it's going to lead, etc. But we are only responsible for our backyard. And in our backyard, that's where we should integrate, check our monsters, check our Frankenstein monsters, check our shadows, our rejections, etc., to put them in their healthy place. And then, I mean, whatever happens, happens. You have no control over the others, nor should you, right? Because the control over the others is what brought us here in the first place. So, um, all we can do, and really the only solution we can make, is at an individual level to do this, to take these opportunities of what we observe and go inside, go internally, and check our own Frankenstein monsters, our own rejections, our own surrogate egos, etc., etc.
You see the same wording of this in that same report that I posted. I think it's called the State Threats Report 2024. And effectively, it mentions one of the definitions that the UK, I guess you would call it the UK security services and the intelligence services, They state that you're engaging in hostile activity, and it gives several examples. One example is prior to a big economic conference that the Prime Minister will attend, that some journalist has information or releases information that embarrasses the Prime Minister, right? Now, you see at the heart of all, just as you were speaking, I was just thinking, at the heart of all tyrannies is this, and evil, both in the microcosm or the macrocosm, meaning the world stage, is this notion that the tyrant believes himself to be a victim of, populist usurpers or individuals who don't understand his vision for the world, right? And so he, as he would call them, the profane. He is the superior one; they are the inferior. The good, the evil, the right, the left. I mean, it's always the same, isn't it? Like what you're saying, this binary. And
Silas,
moreover,
thou shalt not make an engraven image of me, and thou shalt not worship any other god but me.
yeah, 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 yeah.
Because the
Which,
engraven image will always be,
mhm,
seen as, inferior, or
exactly.
it will bring it down to defined, right? And you will not worship any other god but me, because I am a jealous God. So these two automatically link to
Mm.
what you're saying. Go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely, and also as well, um, you see the same problem. It's a Frankensteinian complex, right? That, like what you're saying, this victim idea, where, for example, it's not actually because the prime minister was engaging in something that is embarrassing, yes, but why is it embarrassing? Well, he might have been engaging with, I don't know, the services of, I don't know, rent boys or prostitutes or, harlots of the night, or he could have been engaging in, I don't know, doing lines of class A drugs. Who knows, right? But these things are sins. They're evil. They are, according to the system that he runs, they're crimes, right?
Mm.
However, the crime that he commits is perfectly fine,
Mhm.
because he has the protection of this. He is the state, effectively. That's what it's saying. But the fact that you embarrass him by shining a light upon his iniquities, his inadequacies, his crimes, that is the problem. You're the victimizer. He is the victim of this ordeal. So you see that that same thing is at the heart of all tyrannies. This
Mhm.
notion that that they aren't perpetrating evil. You just don't understand they're good, right?
Yeah.
So it's yeah, it's profound. So that's really the issue with tyrannies. And something else I was going to ask, getting back to the marathon notion, and
Mm.
even, well, let's look at this, the paradox of valuation, right? And I mentioned to you in our discussion, and this was in accordance with the marathon analogy. I said through valuation you come to devalue all things, and from its a point of view of its intrinsic worth. So, is there a profound paradox in, you know, in that statement, right? Firstly, and moreover, how does that paradox, uh, how does it align with the economic model that we're living under? For example, if you put a price tag on a forest, a nation, a human, do we strip it of its sacred character, right?
Of
And
course, you strip it of love. Yes. Yes.
Mhm,
Yes. You strip it of love. I mean, it's like I say, when the sun goes up in the morning, does it shine selectively on the worthy, or does it shine simply, does its thing, and whoever catches the sun catches the sun. I mean, gets the light of the sun. When the river flows, does it flow only for you, the worthy, or does it flow for everyone? Right? When the tree grows, does it grow only specifically for the benefit of, But then what happens is that the mind characters that want to make things predictable and that want to install the economic system because they rely on it, of course, they start delineating the frontiers of, you can only go to this river um, under license, or you can't at all, or like that thing that you said about William the Conqueror not allowing hunting deer and so on, which is, uh, uh, I mean, I think it goes across all the historical records of every nation, with all the pinches of salt that I have to utilize when reading the historical record. But so there, the delineations are then applied by the worldview. In nature, everything, life itself is, let's say, an act of love, in the sense that it doesn't ask for anything back. It may take what it needs, right, to eat, to etc. It may take what it needs, but it doesn't. When it does something, it doesn't ask anything back. It's not an exchange per se, right? And the exchange, when they do happen, they occur naturally. They're not requested or demanded, right? So, and I'm not just talking about the human world, but in the sense of man, that is even more so, or it should be at least. Yes, it devalues completely. When you insert economic thought into anything, you remove completely its meaning. It's the same thing as you making love with your woman that you love, etc., and you having sex with a whore. You know, one is an act of love, the other one is an exchange, an economic exchange. And of course, in one you will be fulfilled, in the other you will not. For that very
Mhm.
reason, because you removed the love from it, right? So absolutely, it strips away completely any value, any intrinsic value that it would have.
So, what you typically find with these empires and their cycles is that eventually, once the decline and the collapse phase occurs, is that there is a certain nihilism that takes over within the population, even if they try to mask it through, whatever means. Conservatism is one of those means, right? Hence why it's impotent, just like all of the other means in which this is masked. So does the economic mindset inevitably lead to that nihilism, because it turns that unknown and divine into mere inventory?
Yes, of course. Yes, because then anything goes. And we see this for a long time. It's
Hmm.
not even recent. We already see for a long time that, even people that we know in our vicinity will do anything for money. Nothing is outside. And when I say money, I'm talking about the economics, because money is a subset, right? Um, it's not about being, what they consider right or wrong. It's not about even being themselves. It's about earning as much as you can within that worldview, so that you achieve a certain level, whatever that may, you know, they might imagine to be. Right. So absolutely, it does. It does lead to an anything goes scenario, and that is why, I mean, why did you in 2020 see Neighbors report on Neighbors? Right.
Yeah.
I mean, if there was any semblance, I'm not even talking about, serious love, etc., but if there was any semblance of empathy between um, the individuals in these communities, at the very least, they would say, "No, man, I'm not going to report him." I even disagree. Let's imagine someone who truly believes that there was this threat. I may even disagree, but I'm not going to be the snitch. I'm not going to ruin this guy's life, or ruin these things because
Mhm.
he sees it differently from me. No, they went for it. Those that could, and that were deep down integrated enough into that worldview, went for it and took the chance gladly. because that was an opportunity to exert power that they until then didn't have, right? So yes, it becomes an anything goes, which is basically nihilism, right? Absolutely.
And you typically find this even in academia, for example. There's an issue with not just students, engaged in academic misconduct by, of course, the utilization of AI. I mean, there's certain academic institutions that are now just saying, throwing their hands up and saying, yeah, let's all just use AI. Well, you can use AI if you like. Even the university I'm in, there's a lot of classes where the professors will just actively, usually it's the younger professors that will say, just use AI. It doesn't matter. Just make sure if you do use AI, just put at the bottom of your report you've used AI. So but that tells you as well, and this is what is typically being shown, that a lot of these professors themselves and these researchers, they're also using AI, right? So in that, what
There's
you're
something.
finding is there's a perverse incentive structure at play, similar to the economic model that we're seeing here. Jump in, Armin, sorry.
No, I was just going to say that in there we have to ask ourselves one thing. Nowadays, when someone with any semblance of a connection to their individual ego, when someone goes to these universities, do they go there to actually learn, or do they go there to get a piece of paper that the worldview requires for whatever, right? They go there to get that piece of paper. So instead of um, having to force oneself to write things within the framed within the framework that they give of what is acceptable, better to use AI. At least you don't get involved in a thought process that is alien to you, right? So it depends on why you are going to the university. If you go there naively and innocently seeking knowledge, you're going to be you're going to
Absolutely.
have a surprise, right? But if you go there already with the notion that I am doing this just for that fucking piece of paper, yeah, use AI all the way. At least you don't submit yourself to the thinking that they require. You present the paper, yeah, it was AI, fine. Give me the whatever you want in exchange, because you're playing a game.
Yeah.
You are aware that you're playing a game. This doesn't count for who you are. You understand? So it depends in that regard. It depends. Of course, in if these were places to actually learn something, that is unthinkable. To use AI would be unthinkable. But these are not places. These
Mm.
are places of indoctrination, as you well know, and has you have presented that several times with several examples. So
Oh, absolutely.
yeah, give them what they want. Write. You don't even need to write. Then it would actually, you know, perhaps take a bigger toll on you, right? Yeah, just have AI write it the way they want it, framed within the acceptable that they like, and present it fine. You know, I think it's even a way to evade, um, being involved.
Well, that's what this individual I was listening to. That he was an ex-academic, and he doesn't, of course, he has issues with academia himself, and he mentioned that he says AI isn't the problem here. AI is merely showing the, I guess you would call it, the vulnerabilities, or even the misgivings of the system itself. I mean, what has education become? And he put it down to, there's this other academic he cited where he showed that both the professors and the students, all they require from either the degree or, of course, all the research to get the tenure, is all they want ultimately is status signaling. That's it. And so there is no learning that goes on in any of these institutions. And he stated, well, eventually what will happen is the barrier for entry will just be money. You give us money, we will give you the degree, and it'll be this sort of fake process where you don't even have to do anything. You'll just get the degree vis-a-vis the money. They'll just they'll cut down on the BS, if you will, of the pomp and all that.
It's paying for a license, you
Exactly.
know, because that
Yeah.
that degree, what will allow is it will, I don't know, allow you to set up a business or whatever it is, right? So it's the same thing as paying for a business license, which
Hmm.
I'm sure that in the UK that exists too. It
Yeah.
exists here, right? You have to pay for a license to open a shop or
Hmm.
a business of some sort. So it's the same thing. It will become that for sure. It will become that.
So doesn't that show that? Before I get on to this, but this other question, I wanted to ask this question. Doesn't that just show that fundamentally what we're stating regarding not just the economic model, but bureaucracy in general, government in general, fundamentally, the longer that government runs, if you will, as I guess, as a software program, um, foisting itself onto the populace, that it will grow larger. Firstly, of course, that's a given, but then it will always seek to strip away those things which cannot be measured. So, for example, we're talking about education here, learning.
Mhm.
They will set up these institutions which provide, again, they hijack the organic sense of learning, which is, of course, a human trait. They flip that around, they turn it on its head, they invert it, they turn it into these sorts of rituals of non-learning, but given the semblance of learning. And then, of course, they put a price tag on it. The price tag is the measurable value of that thing. So ultimately, it strips away any intrinsic worth that that process has.
Mhm.
So this is the irony of the system, isn't it? Because we take our finite time and we trade it for this infinite supply of credit, what we call, of course, money. But this is the thing. All eventually within that system, that economic system, all of the things that would provide our time meaning, other than just sort of moment to moment valuation or measurement, um, through exchanging our time for money, it robs us of any potential fulfillment in the end. I mean,
Oh,
we really could take
mhm.
anything, any example, and that turns out to be correct, in the wash, so to say.
Yes, yes, absolutely. And it also, in the process, the shadow will um, consume everything around it until there's nothing left and it consumes itself, because that will inevitably be a consequence, right? Because the if you imagine the picture of a vampire, right? And you drain the blood of the victim, right? And you drink the blood, you drink the blood. Suddenly, okay, the blood, there's no more blood in the body. The only creature with blood is yourself. So you start biting yourself to get blood, right? So you drain yourself. You understand? This is
Hmm.
inevitable, because anything that is based on consumption, not on, like I said, love initially, right? Not as an act of life, of organic life. Anything that is based on consumption reaches a threshold where it turns on itself. You know,
Hmm.
it's interesting because when people come up with these ideas of autoimmune diseases, right? As if the body would attack itself, right? This
Hmm.
is, and I'm not saying that they are subject to that, because I think that's all BS. But what I'm saying is that an autoimmune disease is what is awaiting the shadow when it reaches a point where there's nothing more to consume. It becomes, it consumes itself. There's nothing more, because it relies on having to eat, on having to consume more and more, right? On having to have that set meal. Let's say, like gluttony metaphor or example that I used in my book, right? It tries to make that meal so predictable that it finds that when there's a point where there's nothing more to eat, it still needs to, right? There's nothing more to eat. You already ate everything there is, but you need to eat more. So you start eating yourself, right? If the issue would be wrath, right? If there's no one else to fight, you start fighting yourself. Because when you're alone, when you're in the pinnacle, when you're alone, when there's no more opponent, and I state and reinforce that every false worldview needs an enemy, depends on an enemy. When there is no more enemy, the enemy is you.
It's the sensation that they're craving. It's the fear of the loss of sensation,
Of course.
fundamentally, isn't it? Yeah.
Yep.
So I think we described within the marathon idea and notion that the marathon was almost like this circus or show of that provides the runner of the said marathon, a bit like the analogy of a hamster wheel or what have you. It provides them the sensation of movement. It's similar to the zoetrope in that sense, that primitive animation device where you look through the slots, the eye slits, and then you spin it, and each of of course, due to the spin and the still images, it creates a sensation of movement, right? Of course, there's no
Mhm.
movement going on; it's an illusion. In a similar sense with the marathon concept, I believe you brought up that idea that um, they will provide you. Uh, they provide you reasons to keep running the marathon, which is almost like them providing you the sensation of the smooth operation of an unreality within the marathon idea. Again, to stop you from just taking a knee, sitting down, and asking yourself, why the hell am I running the marathon? What's the reward at the end? Is there any reward? Um, and I think we tied that in with the concept of, or I think I did. I don't know if you did, but the vertical spin of a spiraling bullet leaving the barrel of a gun. And so this system, in terms of its economic model, would desire to keep that bullet spinning in an intemporal orbit endlessly. And so I wrote this question to ask you. So does this suggest, pardon me, this suggests a state of high velocity but zero progress. We are moving fast but going nowhere. Is the modern obsession with speed, faster internet, faster travel, faster markets, again, things that are measurable and show a linear trajectory of, measurable progress? Is it just a sensory trick to hide the fact that we are effectively spiritually static, right? We think we're running, but in fact we're only running on the spot in this sort of weird ritual, and it's the scenery that's moving around us. What do you think about that?
Yes, yes. What was the promise? What was the promise of the 20th century, especially after World War II? Right. The promise was no more wars and eternal progress. Prosperity and so
And
on. Of course,
flying
none of
cars as
that.
well. And
And
flying
flying
cars.
car, of course, none of that happened. But it doesn't matter because it's merely the promise, right? And so the sensation of motion is, it's like the in religion, it's like the return of Christ. Yes, it's just around the corner. It's next year. Next year he's coming back. No, and then next year doesn't happen. No, it's the year after. I've made a miscalculation here, you know, and it keeps this objective always in the future, because it's a promise. It's a vain promise. It was never meant to be fulfilled because it can't be fulfilled. It is ridiculous. It is a ridiculous notion, right? And so the only way, really, there is no revolution, there is no organized rebellion or whatever it would be. Nothing that you can do collectively. The only solution is individual. It is in our own backyards, check our own things. And when we put them in order, then, well, the rest will come. Whatever comes will come, right? And it will certainly put you in a much better place, in a much better position to deal with whatever comes. And, you know, there is a certain degree of faith in that, but it's not an external faith. It's not a faith in the return of Jesus or faith in that promise, that society made, or faith in whatever it is externally. It is faith in you, who you are organically, faith in that source of love, like I said, that gives you life. And when people have bereft themselves because they stole themselves, because for anything that they sold, people bought and they didn't have to buy, right? And continuously buy. It's not just buy once and then you have buyer's regret and you return. It's that you continue, you get invested in it, right? And so people have removed from themselves their own blood in the metaphorical sense, right? And now, of course, to some, it will be much harder to get it back. It doesn't mean it's impossible, but it will be much harder. But that is what I'm talking about. Get your blood back. Get your actual organic life inside of you. The rest, the external, just observe. Let them play out their things. Waves that rise can never hold. Let them do their things and have faith in you, in your organic source. That is what I would say to that.
So we've touched upon nihilism, and I think it was you that mentioned in our discussion that the marathon relies on misanthropy to maintain
Yeah.
itself. So moving into misanthropy, um, if the core fuel of this marathon is misanthropy, the distrust of the other, effectively, and the hatred of humanity, fundamentally, perhaps because, as Marcus Aurelius stated, all external hatred is fundamentally a hatred of ourselves at some point. It's a projection. Is
Sure.
the act of trust the most dangerous revolutionary act? And moreover, if we started trusting our neighbours without these sort of economic contracts, um, would that bullet shatter? Would the marathon finally stop? Would the game stop running us, so to say?
Well, cooperation breaks game theory. So there's your answer there, right?
Yeah.
Game theory implies that you are always making decisions based on a competition, right? So if you cooperate, you break the game. Of course. Of course. Therefore, trust. And I'm not saying trust everyone. Of course, we are selective, but it depends on what your basis of selection is, right? If it's, for example, like we were talking about in the previous thing, if it's merely what is considered race, you're outside of it. You don't see the individual. You see a biological suit, let's say, right? Because then it becomes a materialistic thing. My trust is based upon the material appearance. Because then what is the difference, right, between seeing someone who is poorly dressed and someone who is in the best, Italian suit or whatever, right? And if you trust the guy in the suit more, you are as materialist as the guy that sees the race, right? So I'm not saying indiscriminately trust, but yes, trust those that you have a connection to, and when you have a connection. It's not something that you force. It's not something that of course, you have to invest in, but it's not something that you have to lie to yourself to obtain. You either have a connection or you don't, right? But yes, that trust is an act of love that breaks the game.
Speaking to, I guess, the potential detractors that we would have regarding, our rejection of the economic model, and even I guess, the economic man in general. I guess they would say something along the lines of, if we stripped profit or the pursuit of profit and perhaps the pursuit of progress or whatever definable goal, reward incentive that we had, um, if we strip that from, basic survival, which effectively is, I guess that's one way to define an economic system. You distribute based upon this reward incentive relative to how much one has worked. For example, do you believe humans would they still work, right? Driven by this, this love, this greater ontological motivation, rather than financial fear? Do you believe that they would still be incentivized to work, to produce, to earn their daily bread? How would you answer
Well,
that?
let me tell you a story that was from years ago. I know that you already are aware of this story, but other listeners may not. Several years ago, I adopted an old dog, and this old dog had been, abandoned several times and was really in a bad shape. At the very least, nobody knew the age exactly, but she was at the very least 15 years old. And when she came when we adopted her, she had several problems. She could barely see. She couldn't eat well. She was weak. She had incontinence. There was several problems with this dog. Uh, in the perspective of what I and we had to do for that dog, it took a lot of work. But I can tell you, I didn't work a single minute for that dog. It was 2.5 years that the dog was able to have a dignified, um, existence. And I didn't work. I didn't regret a single minute I spent with all the work that the dog gave me. Right. So that answers your question. What is the motivation behind what you do? If you love what you do, is that work? You know, am I working by talking here with you? It's a pleasure, right? Or are you going to pay me? Well, I can send you my bank account if you like. Uh, you know, that is why I never, for example, wanted to involve money in my things, in these things that I consider my vocation. You know, I didn't work for that dog. It was to me what I would do, right? In the same way that you would take care of, I don't know, your fiance or a son that you might have, or whoever, uh, um, or a neighbor that you like very much, right? So it depends. What is your motivation, right? And that is the question that people have to ask themselves, right? Because if you do it merely to obtain something in the game, you are draining your blood, like we were talking before. You are removing your organic life from you to play a make believe zombie game.
Well,
You know?
that's the basis of the usury system. It's by the way, that's also what I found when I wrote that piece. The theory of ontological economics, which is that effectively people produce better work when they love what they're doing. And it's not just they produce better work, they feel better about the work that they are doing.
Mhm.
And it's like you're saying, you don't work a minute. Um, so I think that proves it. That effectively, if love is at the heart of that ontological motivation, that effectively work doesn't become work at that point. You aren't trying to, work to reclaim the time that you're giving for the, the token of time, which is the money. I mean, it's complete. It's so utterly ridiculous that we actually do this, but this is the usury-based system, right? It produces nothing of any value whatsoever. In fact, it extracts value from the people and eventually destroys them like some sort of vampiric parasite. Um, and we're always told that man is naturally lazy, right? Or even he's naturally evil. He's this Hobbesian monster. At any moment he may turn. This sort of like he's some sort of
Misanthropy.
werewolf.
Yeah.
Misanthropy, absolutely. And
Mhm.
I noticed, and again, take this with a pinch of salt because it is from the historical record, but um, the medieval Mason, he had vast amounts of leisure time, especially the English medieval Mason. He only had to do 14 weeks of labor for basically a year of life, right? And he had vast amounts of time off. Um, and yet they built these great cathedrals, supposedly, right? They gave the chat effectively gave their work, gave their artisanal skills to spiritual charity, to spiritual pursuits in that manner. Um, so have we been lied to about history? Is this modern grind, this hustle culture, is it a recent invention? Is it designed to suppress the very architecture, if you will, of spiritual greatness in us?
It is designed to suppress. I don't know if it's recent or not. That is something I can't really know how long it's been going. But for sure, that history is a story given to contextualize and give legitimacy to this view. Of course, history, what do you see in history? You see wars all the time, all the time. And when there isn't an open war, there is a conflict of a social nature of some kind within the civilizations themselves, right? And even if it's not that, then it's a mercantile war, like a war of merchants and so on. There isn't anything there that's outside of these conflicts, of this misanthropy. When you look at the historical record, man, if you were to believe it, like many do, you will see man as the worst thing. I mean, it's almost like the agent Smith in the Matrix. You are a virus consuming the planet. Yes, I can see why people relate to that if they believe the historical record, right? But when we understand that the historical record is a story exactly to contextualize and legitimize a belief system that is imposed, then things change. And then you start looking beyond the perception filter, let's say, the perception based virtual reality, and you'll find something very different beyond that filter.
Absolutely, I totally agree. So moving along to the notion of the trap of the winner, and you've sort of spoken about it, but we'll look at it from a more systemic point of view as well. We've spoken about it from the trap of the individual who pursues, for example, money or a materialistic or hedonistic lifestyle. Eventually, are they really winning? Will they ever win? Um, is to give away 10, 20, 30 years of your life to on the notion that you can buy back that freedom later or that time later. Is that a good deal? Um, but touching upon the monopoly paradox, and it was something you mentioned to add to this to mention within my questions to you. Um, you mentioned that, quote, not even the bank wins, only the game wins, and
Mm.
uh, in regards to that, you made a fascinating distinction there with firstly the monopoly game, and that itself is, I think, a sort of it's in a way predictive programming, or perhaps not. Well, yes, predictive programming, or it's disclosure. It's controlled disclosure, if you will. I think that game.
Mhm.
Not even the bank is the winner. Only the game itself wins because it is being played. Does this imply that the so-called elites or ruling class, the oligarchy, are actually just high-ranking prisoners within this game? Are they just as trapped in the vortical spin, if you will, or the marathon run, as the poor compelled to maintain a system that consumes their very humanity just to keep the bank in existence? Are they all prisoners? Is it a
Yes, yes,
prisoner's
they're
dilemma?
prisoners. They're Victor Frankenstein, victims as well of their own monster. And many people will say they're not victims; they live great lives. And yeah, it depends on what you consider a great life. But yes, absolutely they are, because it's put yourself. Let's look back again to the individual. The individual rejects something. That something generates a projected shadow. That projected shadow generates, therefore, a false worldview of perception and gets a reflected shadow back. And that false worldview grows and grows and grows and grows in the process. In the beginning, the mind character generated that false worldview and was in control of it. After a while, who is in control? Is it the one that generated the worldview, or the worldview controlling the mind character? Because it's like I said, it always turns on itself, right? The shadow always turns on itself after a certain threshold. So who is in control? And that is why the game has to continuously being played. Because if you put away the board and the pieces and you stop playing Monopoly, what happens? Can you imagine what would happen to these mind characters?
Oh yeah, it'd be total fracturing. Yeah, a
Complete
complete
fracture.
reset. Yeah.
Yes. Yes. Even yesterday, I was talking with Noble, and Noble actually said something very interesting, which is, so there's an astronomical conjugation next year in February that I don't recall, to be honest. But he said that it represents the Great Reset. It's the way he names it. And he said people are all, upset about the Great Reset, that they are going to apply, that the system is going to apply, etc. And he says, well, the Great Reset doesn't have to be this great disaster. It is actually an opportunity for you as an individual to do a reset on your individual psyche, right? Because the energy is just right, according to his view, his astrological view. The energy is just right for you to do that reset inside of you, right? So people externalize and see, oh, look what they're doing to society and this and that and the other. And I'm not saying that they're not. Of course, I observe that. But these energies, they can either be hijacked by where they direct our attention to, or we can reclaim and use it. That's why I try to reclaim the word ego, because ego means me, means I, means the individual. And while they, misdirect and say that ego is evil, ego is an enemy, this, you have to reduce your ego, you have to fight your ego, you have to, sublimate the ego, or whatever, all other words that both in religion and psychology and everywhere you find. I say, no, take your ego back, because your ego is your actual authority, is your decision center, is your actual vantage point of observation, right? So who's to say that the energy, the astrological energy that they always synchronize their scripts to, they always synchronize their stories to the astrological events. Why is that to their benefit and not to yours? It
Mhm.
is perhaps to their benefit if you direct your attention and therefore your involvement to what they're showing. But it is a great opportunity, perhaps, if you do it internally, where your responsibility is, where your backyard is, right? So who's to say if that great reset isn't a great opportunity for many individuals, as an example?
Regarding even you brought up history, but
Mm.
we could go into even the legitimacy or the legitimizing machine that is, for example, scientism, religion, and you mentioned that they have to maintain the binary, the me versus you
Mhm.
notion, this plus one minus one, to effectively establish a self-correcting, self-generating loop. Um, so as the pendulum swings here, because of the sort of reactivity of that side, it then swings back and so on and so forth. And so, it's interesting, for example, with science and religion, right? This is a false dichotomy. And fundamentally what we see with the two, um, is scientism being sort of academia, given a sort of air of religiosity by the laity, is
Mm.
both of them are intermediate epistemic filters, right? And also they demand that you epistemically outsource to them. So you
Yeah.
effectively give over your mind, or your soul, depending on if it's religion or science, or a little bit of the two. So you have the two pillars, the Boaz and Yakin, of, I guess, an epistemic management system. And so my question is this, right? You mentioned that this binary struggle is legitimized by scientism in our discussion on WhatsApp. We often see this as, you know, misused. For example, within Darwinism, and social Darwinism was used heavily by a lot of the left wing. Funnily enough, it's being used by a lot of the technocrats as well. So
Hmm.
this notion of the idea of the survival of the fittest applied to economics. So has science been weaponized to convince us that greed and misanthropy are not moral failings? Was science ever something that was, not weaponized? Was it always planned to be a weapon? And moreover, have they made it into a sort of unavoidable? It's the same thing you mentioned with your history example, that it's made into this sort of unavoidable idea dictated by biological laws, right? This notion of the survival of the fittest. And moreover, as well, is scientism the modern theology that keeps the marathon running? What's your opinions upon that?
It is. It is. It was a replacement of a religion. One thing is science. Science is the pursuit of knowledge, and it is not ideological. It has no beliefs. Science has no beliefs. It has hypotheses and it has observations and it has conclusions from those observations, but it has no beliefs and it has no ideologies. And of course, scientism is the application of the quote unquote supposed principles of science onto a religious framework. And that's why you see science has its holy books, it has its priests, it has, its dogmas, which are beliefs, dogmas. So everything that you find in scientism, you find in all of the other religions, every single one of them. So it was merely a replacement for, a new mask of this marathon or the wheel, whatever you want to call it, to continue going, right? Because people, of course, there's a certain build up and threshold. And if people think that there is, a revolution, a change, a hope, whatever, it releases some of the steam, even though nothing changed, right? But it releases some of that steam, or people are convinced that there was finally release of pressure or whatever. So it releases something. It doesn't solve anything, but it releases something. So that is why it is applied. But in effect, scientism is no different from Christianity, is no different from, I don't know, Islam or Buddhism or whatever you want to call it, whatever other um, religions you want to come up with. It is no different. It is the same structure exactly, that merely changed the mask because a change from time to time is required to release some steam. You know.
Absolutely, and I also think as well, society has it's evolved in a manner in which for example, it's less about the individual and his soul, which of course was the domain of religion, right? They control the soul to thus manage the body of the serf. In our system now, because we've moved into this, of course, is an issue, I guess, a byproduct of industrialization. That with industrialization, you developed a managerialist class, and the managerialist class began to see, um, they didn't see the individual soul. Arguably, perhaps neither did a religion either, but at least the priest had some humanistic connection with the individuals of their congregation. So I think it was a self-correcting mechanism there, right? Meaning that they would see the individual more so than the manager. When you start to involve economics directly into the picture, the manager just sees everything as as a potential asset, uh, a massified host or unit. So effectively, what you're doing is you're controlling the mind to thus manage this unit or this machine of the massified populace. So in that sense, it is the same as religion, but it's almost like an evolved version, right? The superego that they're creating, of course, still uses the same sort of externalized guilt, for example, climate change and all of this nonsense. It still uses those same things, but it's got a certain technique and power to it that's far more. It's far less human. Of course, I'm not saying religion was humanistic, but it feels far less human. It feels more cold, wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, although when you really look at it, there's really the differences that you point out aren't really there. Because
Mm,
you might say that, yeah, the priest had direct contact with the congregation or whatever, but so does the, let's say, community organizer, right? But the bishop
mm,
didn't know or care about the congregation, nor the pope, nor the cardinal, right? And so the higher you go in the pyramid structure of the religion, be it scientism, be it, for example, Christianity, as using your example, the less you have human contact there. But the community organizers down where the things get dirty, let's say, they have to have that human contact, and they are trained just like a priest was trained to direct the soul, to gain the trust, to become a figure of an advisor or someone who is paternal, perhaps, or maternal, depending, that can influence the congregation towards the end. But those are just merely because they have to be in contact. Because above them, like I said, bishops, cardinals, pope, they don't care. They're not even. They were never interested in the individual people. They only collective and how it was going. They were the managerial class already before it was even given a name
hmm
for it, right? So
Yeah,
those
they all
differences I
have the
don't
same.
really see. Yeah.
Yeah, they all have the same function ultimately. Yeah. No, it was just a thought that cropped into my mind there.
Hmm.
Um, so I also wanted to go into yeah. So even you mentioned quite a lot about Darwinism
Hmm.
and how that ties in with economics. I also discussed that in the question. But pinpointing that more so. Um, so firstly, of course, I can imagine you're going to answer this in the affirmative as I would. Darwinism, of course, was established. It was created by the Royal Society, um, and it was promoted by oh god, what was his name? Robert Henry Huxley, I believe. He was the grandfather of course, the
Yes.
famous Huxleys, Julian and Aldous, and that was in I think it was called Group X or something like that. Anyway, they were a part of the Royal Society, the moneyed interests in it. They're all moneyed interests, but they were a bit more moneyed than the other moneyed interests, and they promoted Darwin. They promoted Darwinism. So, do you believe this was sort of I guess a foundational point in which or a stepping stone in which they could, inform both capitalism, communism, and the modern economic um, model? And moreover, as well, could you just go into how Darwinism is used in that sense to inform the
Mhm.
modern economic model and economic
Well,
animal?
well, Darwin was a marker for everyone, even those who opposed it and even those who didn't care about it. But it was a marker for everyone that in the collective narrative, God is dead. And this is not to say that that vision of an external God was correct. Okay, it was a replacement of a false context for another false context. But this was a marker saying God is dead, so we can start with the new phase. And that new phase involved, of course, the Industrial Revolution and several other revolutions that came since then. Of course, the institution, a formal institution of theosophy, which I think is far more important than what is credited, far more important in this whole motion of the narrative than what is credited, and as important over here as it is important in Japan, because theosophy completely associated itself with the Meiji Restoration, for example, and completely changed the society over there and in the unification of Japan that was occurring.
And I
So,
just want to, sorry,
mm,
just interject really quickly. Do you not find it very peculiar that both the esoteric are involved in these revolutions, right? Of course, Freemasonry of the French Revolution and the 1848 revolutions. And as I've started finding, also mass and grand financial interests are part of it. So after these nationalistic revolutions, you have the formation of central banks too. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. Please finish your point.
no, that is absolutely correct observation. So this was entirely, yes, entirely directed, entirely established as a marker. That is where, let's say, the new era actually, had its root, or had its seed planted, if you want to put it like that, in the historical narrative, let's say, right? Because that is the moment where God is in the public eye, formally killed, removed out of the picture with Darwin, right? Um, and again, I reinforce that in my view, it wasn't that the previous view of an external God was correct either. But that's now beside the point. That established that marker. Now, from then on, scientism, as we know it today, was established. Because for Darwin to work, for the theory of evolution of Darwin to work, you have to establish dogmas, right? The dogma of a completely unobservable evolution, macroevolution, right? Completely unobservable. You have to come up with, I mean, the dinosaurs, the pre-human primates, this whole story is developed, and it was developed worldwide, more or less at the same time. Because again, mentioning Japan, during the Meiji Restoration, you have the appearance of these new ideas of the past, about the past of Japan, and effectively after the Second World War, the archaeological finds suddenly appear saying that Japan had these prehistoric eras, the Jomon and the Yayoi, so on, and that the Japanese emperor was no longer of divine origin, but a man. Okay, so here you see as well the shift, and it's not to say that the guy was a god. Of course he wasn't, but it's the shift of the mask, the removal of one mask for another, right? So this was the creation of scientism. It marked the initial step for the creation of scientism, and therefore it was effectively the beginning of a religious substitution. Um, Applied, and it is so effective that people from all other of the former religions follow scientism. You know, every one of them, every one of them, to one degree or another, have a scientism belief
Mhm.
at their core, right?
It, it's
So
it's
absolutely effective.
it's no
Yeah.
different than say the Protestant Revolution and the sola scriptura.
Hmm.
That's how
Hmm.
it feels, with what how you're describing it. So it's like this epochal shift that occurred not necessarily overnight. It perhaps took several decades or what have you, but
Hmm.
um, through in education, indoctrination, through these various epistemic intermediaries like what we're discussing here, the entire society shifted. And Here's another thing. I think this is why a lot of these, like what you're describing there, the what are taken as, for granted as just true, true facts, be them whatever they may.
Uh-huh.
It's because the reality is contorted around you, distorted. You're almost fed. I think you brought it up with Freud. A superego, which is
Yes.
is like this fake. Um, it's the strings of the puppeteer. It's this sort of fake self-correcting, self-rectifying moral conscience within oneself, and all of these
Mhm.
things, by the way, are also um, they're also given the fine vestments and the fineries of I guess you would call it moralizing, right? It's moralized. So, for example, if you deny I don't know, climate change, you're called a climate denier. And this has connotations to, for example, Holocaust denial. So
Yeah.
there's a moral framework there that they're using to, again, you're externalizing the guilt impulse. So it's sort of neurochemical hijacking in that
Mhm.
sense. And so you can see why these things are given the credence of reality when in fact they're not real at all, right? And
Yes.
it can occur very quickly within a couple of generations or so.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. We've talked in the past how I think that the application of a new blueprint will take 2 generations. Maybe I'm being, you know, maybe I'm not giving leeway enough, and it's perhaps 3 or 4. But I think 2 generations are enough for the application of a new blueprint, a new historical blueprint, a new belief system, a new everything.
Yeah, and well, this takes us to a sort of long form question, and I just want to get your take on this so that I'll try and read this as quickly as possible. But
Mhm.
this was a new question regarding the sort of nation state as a tax farm or the consolidation of tax jurisdiction. So I wrote this, Armunn. I want to challenge what is, perhaps the sacred cow of the right, the nation state itself. We are taught to view nationalism as the defence of an ancient organic blood bond. Yet, when we examine the historical record, particularly around the revolutions of 1848 and the unification of Europe, you've mentioned as well the Meiji Restoration, which has the same fingerprints on it, right? The nation appears less like a tribe and more like a bureaucratic invention, an administrative unit. It seems that the transition from local principalities to the nation state was actually a project of standardization of both a synthetic identity and, as we've mentioned, an economic jurisdictional consolidation. To run a modern economy, the elites conceivably required to dissolve the organic local allegiances that you was found within feudalism, for example, and replace them with a standardized national identity. So, my argument was that it was to create a consolidated tax jurisdiction. Of course, it's inefficient to tax 1,000 disparate tribes or, localized serfs and baronies. It's far more highly efficient to tax one homogenized people, especially a homogenized people that believe themselves to be homogenized, in this singular identity that they believe to be real. And moreover, it facilitates central banking. So you cannot install a central bank over a fractured map. And this is what we found as well, a lot of consolidation of banks, what were previously localized banks within the feudalistic system. Once the nationalistic revolutions came, they all became centralized because, again, the identities became centralized through these unified political entities. So my question is thus, is nationalism actually the Trojan horse of global finance?
Yes, absolutely. It is. It is. But even the previous stepping stone, which was also a stepping stone, was the establishment of a kingdom. And even those, let's say, principalities, as you named them, were already a previous stepping stone. Even if we were to take history as the historical record as a fact, which I don't, if we were to take it as a fact, all of these steps towards the greater, the identity becoming greater, greater in the sense of, a wider um, population, let's say, we're all stepping stones towards globalism. And this is why it's so difficult, because when you are, okay, imagine now people see globalism, they fear it, and as a knee jerk reaction, they go to the nation, right? But now imagine, take a step back and imagine that when the nation is being established and you are part of one of these principalities, you see what the nation is trying to do, you also go knee jerk to defend the principality, right? And when the principality was taken over the families or the whatever it was before, the same thing, right? But what nobody looks at is, okay, and beyond all of this, beyond all of these structures of taxation, like you said, because at the end of the day, the only thing that was being established was jurisdiction, a legal way to exploit, basically, to exploit. And of course, if you give someone an identity, if you give someone an emotional investment into that identity, they are going to follow suit. They are going to go along with it and even proudly represent and do their duty and whatever when they're actually being exploited. So what no one asks is, beyond all of this, and again, even taking the historical record at face value, which I don't, beyond all of this, what would be the organic life? And the thing is, no one has an answer, because that answer, we have to find it out ourselves. But we can only find it after all of the other layers were peeled, right? And we're starting to get glimpses of what it might be. I mean, you've done a monologue on that in the last published conversation. You've
Hmm.
added the monologue on, part of your glimpses of what would be. But this is something that we have to rediscover. I don't know how long this has been going on. If it's recent, if it's ancient, I don't know, right? What I know is that what is there is not legitimate, it is false, and it has no bearing on organic mankind. Now, where is that organic mankind? That is what we have to find out. But first, we have to strip away all the misanthropy, all the economics, all these um, layers of false worldviews that we have grown to believe and integrate into our memory rooms. And to do that, we have to awaken the ego, because the ego is the decision center and the observer. And when he observes, he analyzes, he distinguishes true from false. And even if he doesn't know yet what truth is, he knows that this is false, he throws it away. And then you leave that space vacant so that you can find out what truth is. Because if you replace a false thing that you threw away with another false thing,
Yeah.
as, okay, globalization is false, so I'll go to the nation, you're basically replacing one with the other. You're in the same.
Yeah, you're
You're going to
essentially just
win.
going back to a retro lie. Yeah.
Yes, it's the same thing. And that retro lie was already pushing towards globalization
Yes.
anyway. So it doesn't matter, right? So what we need to do is, okay, we know it, this is false. I don't know what is true. Leave it vacant. Leave it empty. Why do people have this problem with leaving things empty? Why do people have this problem with, well, I don't know exactly how it was? Why is this a problem? If you don't know, you can find out. But if you're convinced you know, you can't find anything out.
Mhm.
Right? You can't learn. You can't discover. Right?
Do you think people ultimately have? I know the system does. I mean, we've discussed that, but do you think people, because they've been turned into this sort of, instead of the ontological individual who is, connected to a more infinite quality, the incommensurate of his soul, as opposed to, of course, the atomized individual, which the masses have become. Be them, of course, the materialistic, technocratic left wing, if you will,
Mm.
or neoliberal, whatever term we want to use, or be them the sort of conservative nationalist or race nationalist. Um, both of them they're all atomized individuals, right? To some degree. I mean, the way they function is based upon atomization. Hence why you have this consistent, constant, perpetual, absolutely well, it's completely unnecessary, this culture war, right, that they talk about. And do you think people, of course, the systems they fashion this sort of division, induce, and antithesis, right? That's part of the whole economic model. And you mentioned
Mhm.
it yourself with the synthetic identities. But what are people afraid of if they were to stop running the marathon to actually sit down? Do you think there's a fear there? And what
Of
do you
course,
think
there is.
upon the individual level that is?
Yeah, there is a fear, and it's a fear that comes from the external. Because when you look at all the narratives in history, in media, etc., what do you see? Oh, if we don't protect ourselves, the others will invade. If we don't, create more regulation, there are more shootings. Or if we don't do this, there's going to be more disease and more epidemics and more this and oh, and then of course aliens will invade and the nuclear weapons and oh my God, of course, people become paralyzed completely, internally paralyzed by all this fear that is externally induced. Because if you look at your internal life, if you stop the marathon, like I said, and you look at your internal life alone in yourself, there's nothing going on. There's nothing going on inside of you that purports to that external fear, unless you identify with it, of course. If you identify, then it's going on.
Yes.
Then you're in the game. Then you're in the binary. Then things, yeah, I have to go and fight and run and do. And of course. But if you stop and take a deep breath, nothing is going on. And this is the first step to awaken the ego and reanalyze all of the layers of false memories that caused and reinforced those fears. You know, that's why I said, and I bring back Noble again, that I spoke yesterday. He said, well, the Great Reset, we've all heard this phrase in the context of the WEF, right? And with the Doctor Evil uh, in the movie, the Doctor Evil of the Austin Powers movie, right?
Yes.
Saying those things. Um, but what if that energy is actually an opportunity? And that's why they're so um, committed to inculcate that this period of time is the devilish time, evil that they're going to. This for the people, of course, in the alternative media, because those in the MSM are just going along with whatever. But it might be actually an opportunity. We don't know, right? We have to be there and experience it. But first, just check in yourself: are these threats really going on? Really, you know? And only you can answer. I mean, if your answer is yes, then go do what your conscience tells you to do. It is better that you participate to the extent that you participate than to reject again, because then you double reject. You've rejected initially and then you reject again, so you
And
have two
and
shadows instead of one. So
and
follow
doesn't
it to the end. Yeah.
sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, man.
No, that's it. I'm finished.
Doesn't that also show as well, even this feeling of fear? It shows that what you fear fundamentally is an abstraction, right? We don't fear things that we can see. You fear the monster because you can't see the monster. Your mind is conjuring the monster effectively through cues from the external world, imagined futures that are eating your present.
Mhm.
And of course, that's what fear does, right? It's this sort of all-consuming force. Um, there's also an idea as well that eventually people become addicted to fear, right? They become addicted to that mindset. And this could maybe also explain how they develop these hyper realities, what really is unreality, but they believe it to be reality, vis a vis them identifying with this fear, which itself is an abstraction. So you mentioned it, for example, right? The divine, pardon me, the divide and conquer, right? They divide people up. People oppose other people. They break down communication between them. So people have this fear on both sides that, well, if I don't act impulsively, perhaps violently, perhaps, in a manner that's not within my interests, in a manner that's not within the interests of cooperation, the ultimate game theory, strategy within game theory, then, if I don't take punitive action against them, then they will eventually get me, right? Um, and you see everything within the system. Of course, yeah, it perpetuates the game through the fuel of misanthropy, through the fuel of division. But the divide and conquer itself is, well, firstly, I mean, in military terms, it's an easier way to defeat a larger opponent. If you're a
Mhm.
minority, you're not, you're not going to, I don't know, if you're a minority force, military force, compared to, your larger insurmountable enemy, right? What you'll do is what Napoleon did. You would defeat them in detail. It's called. So you'll break up vis-a-vis ruses. You'll break up the army so you can deal with each pocket of that now divided larger force in detail, thus making it easier for you to deal with them. Um, so I mean, there's that notion, but as well, there's something I want to ask regarding consumerism, and you actually see this within consumerism, and it's this within the economic model, right? And I think this is why economics itself is a social science, because it really is. I mean, it's fundamentally about psychology. It's economics is behavioral science, and so what you see with consumerism is it's a psychological weapon designed to effectively turn us into creatures of envy, right? Perpetual envy, frenzied envy. And so by turning us into, consumers, effectively they have atomized us all, of course. But they've in misanthropy, they've made us hate the other through that competition. And for prestige or consumer emulation, the idea of keeping up with the Joneses. Um, what I wanted to ask is of course we're psychologically incapable of solidarity, and which would be required to overthrow them in that state. But is there something deeper within that consumerism? Are they
Yeah.
are they terraforming our soul? If that makes sense, is it some sort of longer term psychological conditioning rather than just a short term control structure?
Well, my friend, they're doing um, the proponents of that shadow are turning the people into shadows, just like them. Because if the system consumes, and if you are turned into a consumer, right, like you've said, then you become the shadow, a smaller version of the shadow that is at the top, right? Let's say, providing this structure, right? So you become, like, if you want to see an octopus, you become a tentacle or a little tip or whatever you want to see of each tentacle. You become a part of the tentacle of the entire shadow, right? Because you synchronize your worldview with the shadow's worldview. And so you have to remove yourself first from the worldview individually, and then we'll see. Right? But yes, the deeper connotation and the deeper effect of that goes straight to the soul, as you were saying, is that you turn into them. You understand? That is why in these circles,
Yeah.
you easily find, even though they don't admit it, you easily find people who envy the power, who would actually jump at the chance of, getting into one of these groups. This is the harsh truth we must confront. A lot of people in these circles that would probably have discussions with us, and they would agree with everything we're saying and this and that, but you would detect an undercurrent there, where that actually what exists there is jealousy. You understand?
Well,
Because they have
it's like
accepted.
the.
Yeah.
Sorry, please finish your point.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
Well, it's like the working man, and I've seen it within. Of course, I'm working class, and even on the construction sites, the working man will say that. They'll say, "Oh, these politicians, these bankers, these they're." And they'll list off all their crimes, right? Which of course I agree with. But
Mhm.
fundamentally, it's not coming from a point of view that they've not necessarily accepted their lot in life, but that they understand that, or deep down they want change, right? They want change because of a sort of dutiful, perhaps even principled reason, right? A reason born out of love, um, for whatever it may be, their family or what have you, right? It comes from jealousy, because and this is why I said recently as well, if the majority of people were put into their, and you agree, if the majority of people were put into their position, because they don't even understand who they are, they're still like Frankenstein's monster running about, the frozen wastes of the Arctic, searching for Victor, to curse him and kill him, and send him to the void of Tartarus. But he's still, even with killing Victor, he's still left in this destituteness, right? Of who am I?
And he
And so,
self-immolates. And he self-immolates.
exactly, yeah. And this is the issue, because his identity, his quest, it wasn't. It was born on foolish grounds. It was the fool's journey. It was the fool's game. And fundamentally, he didn't realize, or didn't start his journey for the right reasons. He started so the beginning will, pardon me, the end will always emulate the beginning, in that sense, and that's one thing I agree with regarding Kabbalah and its system. The end will always emulate the beginning. If you start your journey off from the wrong principles, that will reverberate and echo through into the end. So you won't have a culmination that will provide you a sort of closure. You will meet basically self-immolation, right?
Yeah.
Um, and I've got a few other questions I wanted to ask you, and these are sort of somewhat divergent. They still, orbit around the ideas that we were discussing. Um, so you see, for example, with Francis Fukuyama, he has this notion of the end of history, and this will tie into nationalism somewhat. And I want to get your opinions upon this. The end of history is effectively postmodernism. It's the denial of the universal truth as an axiomatic principle that we should abide by, and this is why, of course, technocracy has become so cold. Do you agree that consumerism, which is an outgrowth of this end of history, would you see it as the perfection of slavery? This notion that, I think somebody said it recently, it's you don't think that, cogito ergo sum, right? I think therefore I am. You don't think therefore you are. You think therefore I buy, right? So effectively, what you buy, is what you identify with, right? What you buy becomes your artificial ego. Um, do you think it is the perfection of slavery in a sense?
Yeah, it is a perfection of slavery, because deep down what happens is that the slave becomes also the slaver. Because what happens is that you are put in to a hierarchical structure where if you succeed at a certain level of being a slave, you are given a promotion to the next level, right? Which would uh, um, make you therefore have jurisdiction or have your own, let's say, group of slaves beneath you, right? Like, for example, imagine a company where, you start off as a regular worker there, right? But if you perform well according to the framework of the company's worldview, you are given a promotion and become a supervisor, for example. And when you become a supervisor, you are then the slaver of those groups of slaves while being a slave yourself of those above you, right? And if you get promoted again, then you increase the pool of slaves underneath you and so on and so forth in a progression, if you play ball and if you act accordingly. So, yes, it is a perfection in that sense. Because if you keep the slaver and the slave as a separate entity, there is always a visible thing or a visible entity that you can rebel against, right? So you can, okay, that guy, we will get him someday, right? That he's the slaver. We'll find him off guard one day, and we'll get him back. Another thing is when you are the slave, right? When you are both parallel and simultaneously the slave and the slaver, at least in potential, if nothing else, right? Because then who are you going to rebel against? Yourself, right? You're going to rebel against yourself. It becomes part of your own quote unquote self interest, which is not. It is the self interest of an abandoned mind character following a false worldview to play ball and to do better in the game, right? To use your skills to improve the actual system itself. So it is, yes, I agree. It is a perfection of slavery in that sense, because that key distinction between the perpetrator and the victim, which, again, I say, I am against the idea that people are victims. Of course, they can be victim of a circumstance, a circumstantial act, but someone who is victim of, a perpetual state is not a victim. He has become that state. He has become. It's like Mr. Iozo was saying the other day, and he presented a parable where someone sees a hole, doesn't notice it, falls in the hole. Then he passes on that street. He sees the hole, notices the hole, but falls anyway. And the third time he passes the street, although he knows that he will fall in the hole, he still throws himself onto the hole until he finally passes there, notices the hole, and decides, hang on, I'm not going to. Right. So you have become, for you to fall in that hole time and time again, you have to become the hole faller. Right. You have to identify with the guy that falls into that hole.
Yeah.
Right. So the distinction between the slaver and the slave disappears, and that's what perfects the slavery system in that regard.
And so the consumer effectively, a more accurate description of the consumer is, it's not necessarily contingent on his act of consumption. The act of consumption is the notion that he is an attention slave, that the chains that bind him are invisible, but they are very much real and tangible, and they are given that tangibility by his own mind, by his own attention. So, in that sense, yes, there's a sort of illusion of choice. The illusion of choice, of course, is that you get to choose your own distractions within this system. But by you, being given that illusion of choice, instead of the old sort of crude forms of slavery, where the cudgel would force you, or by the crack of the whip, it would force you into the binds. You willingly go to those binds because you believe those binds are in fact freedom. and
Yeah.
thus there's a degree of complicity within your own slavery, and hence it becomes a perfection of it, right?
Yes.
Um,
And also, if you want to consume, to obtain, let's say, the money, which is, like I said, a subset of the economics, to obtain the money to consume, you need to consume someone else to give you that money. You understand? So it becomes you are the slave and the slaver at the same
yeah.
time. You understand?
Mm.
So you need to do better to be able to consume more, and so you have to consume from others. It's a self-perpetuating thing that, of course, it won't be eternally self-perpetuating, because eventually it will reach a point where it consumes itself.
Yes, that even the undead have to die, effectively. Yeah.
Yeah.
I have another two questions to ask, and
Mhm.
I'll try not to keep you too long here, man. Um, but I just wanted to get your thoughts upon
Later
that.
on, we have Regan's presentation too at 8 or 9, right?
We do,
Yeah.
yeah, we do. Um, yeah, I think yeah, it's 9:30 or something, I believe. Um, Let me find it. Hold on. Where are we? Here we go. So I discussed with you the idea of Bacon's rebellion, right, and that being the creation of really what is based on history, this sort of Americanism of the neo-racial categories of white, black, what have you, right? Again, effectively created to establish these synthetic categories, which would bind together, for example, within the white synthetic identity, it bound together for the reasons of creating this new republic in its infancy. All of these various Europeans that would otherwise be at each other's throats, right, in their old homeland continent of Europe. And you saw the same thing, of course, with the blacks and the black identity. This notion uh, of the tribal distinctions, right? So
Mhm.
they established these two synthetic identities, which we see now why they did that. It essentially is being used for divide et impera, divide and conquer, and of course keeping the game running. So um, somebody mentioned recently, it was a recent critic, and of course you know about this because I sent you it. He recently, firstly, told me that my rejection of these neo-racial Americanist categories, right?
Mhm.
Um, that by rejecting them, firstly, I'm falling into postmodernism, this sort of century of self. I'm becoming atomized and lonely, um, a lonely consumer, if you will, and that I'm rejecting a universal truth. And what's interesting about this is that, um, firstly, right, by defining man by his genetics, right? Or I mean, in this case, his phenotype, meaning his skin complexion, pretty much, has the right, firstly, simply adopted the materialism of the left, which is the basis of postmodernism. And are they actually, this is the irony of it, right? I'm rejecting the universal truth, but he's rejecting the universal truth of the human soul. He's falling into the same patterns of the economic animal by simply viewing man through what is measurable, his phenotype in this case, which of course he misconstrues as some sort of genetic lineage or racial identity in and of itself. And moreover, as well, um, is it not the right wing and the left wing, all political ideologies and religious ideologies and all ideologies by and large, are they not the ones who are the postmodernists? Do they not reject the universal truth by their belief in the ideology itself? What's your opinions upon that?
Well, all of these within the worldview create false tribes. Period. If you base the false tribe in, the skin complexion, or if you based on the way it's someone is dressed, or if you based on the words that they use, if they use the pronouns or not, or if you based on, the beliefs or the ideology, whatever they have, it's basically the same. The difference is that the skin complexion you can immediately identify without anything else, any other marker, right? Um, but it's really no different than that. It's not that there is a denial of biology and the biological difference. Is that that biological difference doesn't mean it's adversarial. This is the point. It can be absolutely complementary. And this is not leftist, because yes, the leftists say, oh, diversity is power. But they're not talking about this. They're not talking about this. They are talking about culture. They are talking about ideology. They are not, they don't give, the leftists don't give a shit about the individual. Zero. They are just virtue signaling. They don't care about a black man because he's
Mhm.
black, or whatever because he's whatever. They care about the virtue signaling. They care about being seen by the collective, validated by the collective as someone worthy, right? And this is the same thing that the right does, because the right sees the worth in the other in their biology, while the left sees the worth in the other in their ideology. It's the same fucking thing,
Well,
only
both
a
of
different.
them.
Yeah, yeah.
Sorry, please finish your point. Sorry.
No, go ahead, go ahead. You can interrupt, man.
Well, the left and the right, they're basically they're playing identity politics. You know,
Of course.
basically with just different colored jerseys, and moreover as well, like what you're saying, they don't give a shit about black people, or whatever term we want to attribute to it.
Yeah,
Um, it's similar to the white nationalists. They don't care about white people either. And the way that the white person, the white nationalist, pardon, would interact with a black person is really fundamentally no different than how a left wing uh, multiculturalist would interact with a black person. Both of them see this black man, black woman, black person, whatever, as firstly as meeting the phenotypical outward measurable appearance of a black man, right? Or a black woman, and that they can use them to extract some form of their own in-group currency, right? For the left, they call this
correct.
virtue. For the
Absolutely.
white nationalist, it's the same idea. If they were to abuse the black man, right,
Mhm.
verbally, violently, they would also get virtue for their in group. Um,
In that extreme right, yes.
yeah, yeah. So it's
Mhm.
no different, really. Both of them want to extract the currency of their in group, basically status signal to their in group. They don't really care about the plight of the poor, or the plight of, of course, the diverse races, or whatever it may be, right?
Mhm.
Um, yeah.
No,
Sorry, man, I didn't mean to
if you
interrupt.
were to tell, if you were to ask, and I don't do that generalization, but if you were to ask many of the nationalists and so on, if the principle, in principle, if European colonization would be a good thing, many would probably say yeah, because we're in charge, because we're superior, and they need someone to regulate them, and so we they need us, and we would, yeah, it's a fine system, right? So, I mean, what is the difference between that and globalism?
There's none. Both of them are systems of bigotry of low expectation. It's just
Yeah.
one wants the control more remotely, and the
Mm.
multiculturalist would want the control within their own country, basically turning their own country into the plantation, right? And this is how a
Yes.
lot of them even speak about these diverse races they're bringing in. Immigrant is basically just a byword to these people for slavery.
Yes.
I mean, let's not beat around the bush here. It's all economic. It's all based around
Absolutely.
economic
Absolutely.
behavior, which is
That is the
misanthropy.
core. The economics is the core. Sorry to interrupt.
No, absolutely. Well, it just produces. You're correct. It's the core. It's what produces the misanthropy, and
Mhm.
so economics is a byword for misanthropy. It's you're totally correct. Totally correct.
Yes, and these different vocations, different tendencies, different the differences in the biological uh, then become also tempered with the differences in the individual sense. So the individual soul, if you want to put it like that, or whatever other word you prefer, the spirit, the soul, the individuality, whatever, the ego, like I prefer to use, then the contribution is entirely individual as using the tools that you have, right? Um, and why is this particular um, uh, set of tools that you see the right ones for you and the others are wrong for you, right? Why can't they coexist even in the same call it tribe, call it family, or whatever? This has nothing to do with leftists. It's outside of economics. It's completely outside of ideologies and economics. I am talking about organic life. Organic life. Why does organic life require that? You know, I have a black cat and a sort of striped grayish cat, right? So, they can't relate to each other, right? Because, one is black and one is gray or whatever, right? Of course, they have different personalities. Of course, they have different egos. Let's say, I don't know if cats have ego, but you know what I mean. They have different
Mhm.
individualities, but they don't become adversarial per se. You know, why must it be adversarial? Why? That is the whole point, because it only becomes adversarial within economic structures, within a competition for a scarcity mentality. And what
And
spoils game theory is cooperation. Not cooperation within the economics, but outside of it.
absolutely. And the only people who, or the only minority who effectively, earn dividends from this system, of course, the architects of this rotten theme park, this abusive, self-abusive carousel,
Mhm.
are those who, um, well, is that sort of parasite minority who don't want the cooperation to thus break the game, right? Um, they don't they can't have that sort of I believe it's called the Nash equilibria, where you reach that state of cooperation, and everyone is acting in their own self-interest, which is but it's also informed by what is best for the interests of the group, right? And like what you're saying, that equilibria state is cooperation, right? They want to dissuade that as much as possible, and so this leads us to our final question, Armin.
But
So
but
I
before that, let me
yeah
just do a
yeah
quick
please.
remark, which is that the modern view of races, if you like, yes, comes from Darwin, but was established as an ideology by Theosophy. This has to be verified, or at least acknowledged, that the modern view on race comes from the ideology of the root races that Theosophy presents. That is, excuse me, where every biology marker is represented by a root race in Theosophy. And when we understand that, we understand that we are involved. Once we get into that, we are involved in a religious paradigm, nothing more. It's a religious paradigm that was brought about through scientism under the guise of science, and even DNA. I mean, Sayo just posted a few hours ago an article about DNA. Just read through that article. It's all bullshit. It's the same thing as identifying the virus, and it's. I mean, you can. It's scientism. It's not science. It's dogma. It's belief inculcated, right? And when we understand that, we're involved. If we go down that road, we're involved in a religious paradigm, which is fine if you know about it. I mean, if you decide to do it, sure. I mean, you're responsible for yourself in that regard, but at least know that it is. So, sorry. Go ahead with your last question.
No, absolutely, I agree. Yeah, the root races, and you also find this throughout all of the various esoteric. I mean, of course, it really reached a crescendo with the whole Thulian society and how that was behind a lot of what we saw with National Socialism. So this is all of it is intertwined. Um, so I had in my theory that little diatribe that I wrote, the theory of ontological economics, where I stated laborare est orare, which is to work is to pray. And
No,
of course, it
work
has
and prayer. Work and prayer.
yes, no, that would be est. So
Oh, it's
to
S. I always
yes,
thought it was lavorare e orare. Okay,
it
my mistake.
perhaps
Okay.
may be. It perhaps may be. I might have written that incorrectly. But the way I sort of changed it, and you're
But then
totally correct. It's
in
the
Latin, it
Benedictine.
would, if it was in Latin, it would be laborare orare est, because they would put the verb in the end. So,
Ah,
uh,
yes. I think you're correct. You're correct. Yeah. So to work is to pray, and the way I viewed it, and I think it's the Benedictine monk, motto. Of course, the correct version, whatever that may be, and the way I viewed it is that, like what you were mentioning with the parable or the anecdote that you gave of the old dog that you looked after, right? There was a lot of work involved in that, but there was not one moment that you felt as though you were working, right? And there was something deeper you were getting from that was intangible. It was immeasurable. So it was something that you know it provided a vivification, an invigoration of your soul. And so my question is twofold. And so, hypothetically, if we were to successfully exit this loop of the game, of the marathon, if we were to sit down, if you will, right?
mhm.
And we were to stop the vortical spin of the bullet, um, and we were to enter a world of, let's just call it ontological economics, right? Where we become whole once again. We stop eating from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, seeing the distinctions between things, and we become more organic in ourselves, and we get rid of this economic model. Um, Firstly, what would that world look like to you? And secondly, um, can we can we fix that economic model with with you know s- with the spiritual void still within us that appears to be within us through consumerism and what have you?
Well, firstly, I want to say that I've looked it up, and you are correct. The phrase is laborare est orare. But there's another one that I've posted there. It's ora et labora. So we were both correct, but we were saying
Ah,
different things.
yes.
Anyway, no, we can't fix anything within the system. I mean, we can't. How can you? Um, I mean, can you make Pinocchio be a real boy? Only in the fairy tale, right? You can't really make a piece of wood be a human being, right? So first, you have to get out of that system, and then what lies beyond lies beyond. And you know that if you avoid building a new economic system, then whatever lies beyond would be the organic in that sense. So asking me how would that world look, I don't know. I don't know. I don't need to know. I leave it vacant because anything that I would come up now as an imaginary thing would be my speculation and would have perhaps inculcated in it some past um, convictions or beliefs or whatever that came externally as well. We don't need to know because that world would be built by us. It wouldn't require a planning in the sense of, like you see all these systems, you would need to plan uh, the economics, right? You'd need to plan the jurisdiction. You would need to plan. You wouldn't plan any of this. You would live, and by living, you build that world. So I can't imagine. I can't say, present to you an image. If I would do that, I would already be in error, right? Because I can't speak of a world that I'm not in the sense of the collective, right? I can speak of my world, of my internal world. I can speak to you of my relations to others. And in fact, what I tell you is that, once removing ourselves individually from those paradigms, you actually build a sense of family to a greater extent, to a much purer extent than ever before. When you perhaps had a lot of people around you and a lot of acquaintances and people you called friends and this and that, and it amounted to very little, right? So in terms of that imagined world that lies beyond, you can ask me that, but I won't answer because I don't know. It's not something that's up to me to know. As my mind character, I can't know. I didn't have access to it. Perhaps my ego knows, but it doesn't tell me. And that's it. Because I don't think it's something to know. It's something to live.
Mhm.
You live love. You don't imagine it, right? It's if you love someone, you don't. I mean, if you imagine a life with someone, you're not living that life with someone, right? Love is every moment, every minute, every day, every week, every month, every time that you interact should be an act of love. Right? You don't, if you start projecting onto the future, be it in the sense of a continuation of it or in the sense of a fear of its loss, you're already, like you were saying, removing all the um, intrinsic value of it. Right. So the only way we can do is live it, become, walk the walk, become it internally. I know we have to relate to a society that is crazy, that has all these things. I know we have to be in the game, but being in the game doesn't mean that you are of the game, right? Like be in the world, but not of the world, correct? So I can't really tell you
Mhm.
how that world would look, but I can tell you that the best we can do is live it as much as we can at an individual point, at least.
I think you're correct in what you're saying. So it's that notion that once we begin to become fixated on abstraction, we have we will eventually lose ourselves in identifying with something that is fundamentally synthetic. Synthetic. It's like what you're saying. Do you just love, or do you know of love?
Yes.
Um, and this is the problem I think with the Faustian nature within the economic model within Western man as well, right? We're afflicted by that, but I think it stems from this economic model, even usury to some sense. It's this notion of playing God, turning lead into gold, turning nothing into something of tangible value through the magical science of usury, right? It's that similar concept of you take that which is abundant, that gives freely, that is the um, quintessence of cooperation and love, which is of course the world and of course our own spirit and soul, and you turn it into things that are grotesque reversals the original image. And then, of course, you call it like some sort of botched modern art experiment. You call it art. You call it beauty. You call it the true essence of the thing.
I
Um,
love you so much, I will destroy you.
yeah, exactly. It's like that Kathy Bates, isn't it? Misery. You know.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, you know, we'll be together forever. I'll kill you, and we can be together forever. You know,
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
yeah, absolutely. So anyway, man, with that, I'll just speak this little outro, and then that'll be us. So we began this conversation by asking why we are running the marathon. We looked at the marathon, what it was, that perpetual economic loop designed to keep us cognitively and spiritually exhausted, distracted, and divided. Armunn has laid out the mechanism of the trap, the vortical spin that masquerades as progress, and the game that wins simply because we agree to play it. But we also glimpsed the exit. The marathon lies, or relies rather, on our momentum. It relies on our fear of stopping. So the most revolutionary act that you can commit today might not be a vote, a purchase, or even, of course, a protest. It might simply be to sit down, to refuse the binary, to refuse the commodification of your own soul, to look at the game and realize the only way to win is to walk away from the table. So, from myself and Armunn, I thank you for listening, and may your God or your gods go with you.